Safe Climate Australia is a wonderful initiative, apolitical, solutions-based, science-based, bringing together business leaders, leaders in the scientific community, people from all walks of life, to respond to what many scientists have now been saying is truly a planetary emergency. In the last 100 years, our circumstances as humans on Earth have been radically changed. Just one quick example. At the beginning of the 20th century, there were 1.6 billion people on the Earth. Today, there are 6.78 billion people. And consequently, our impact on the Earth's ecosystem has been magnified. Far more significant has been the development over the last 150 years or so of new and very powerful technologies which have conferred many blessings on us, but because of their power, they have had some unintended side effects that have not immediately been apparent until we gained so much momentum that these effects are now planetary in scale. 150 years ago this year, two events occurred at the same time. In North America, a man named Edwin Drake drilled the first oil well, and it led to the discovery of vast reserves deep under the ground. The other event that occurred 150 years ago was that the great Irish scientist, Sir John Tyndall, discovered that CO2 molecules intercept heat in the atmosphere. And as long as the concentrations of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere were at the natural level, it was truly a blessing because it's one of those natural environmental contours that keep the temperatures in comfortable balance. But when we began to artificially multiply, expand, increase the amount of CO2, we began to trap a great deal more heat in the atmosphere. As a result, the planet now has a fever. If you have a young child with a fever, you go to the doctor. And if the doctor says, well, I hate to tell you this, but this is a sign of something that's more serious, and we're going to have to take some medical action, the typical response by parents is not, well, I was listening to a commentator on the radio the other day, and I think you're wrong. You may ask for a second opinion, and that's what the world has done. 20 years ago, when this great distinguished group of scientists established by the United Nations gave their unanimous report, the world failed to respond and in effect asked for a second opinion. So a few years later, they looked at the evidence yet again and produced a second report, again unanimous, and again nothing was done. So a few years after that, a third report was issued, and a little over a year ago, the fourth unanimous report was issued, and slowly the political systems on this planet began to get the message that they really should respond. But a response to a problem planetary in scale and scope is quite difficult for politicians to consider. I say this as a recovering politician myself. I'm on about step 9 at this point. Politicians in almost every nation have been timid, but it's worth listening to the experience these scientists have had in going through 4 different comprehensive studies of the crisis, because each time they have gone back to look at the new evidence that has been compiled, they have had to re-examine the seriousness of their earlier predictions. And every time they have gone back to re-examine the new evidence, they have come back and said, unfortunately, the results in the real world that we predicted were probable in the last report have exceeded the worst case projections. This crisis is gaining momentum. And the reason why is not that complicated. Today, we will put another 70 million tons of CO2 into the thin shell of atmosphere surrounding the planet. And in the era just prior to that 150-year mark, 150 years ago, the concentrations were at 280 parts per million. Now they're at 389 parts per million. And the consequences that they worried about in the first report included the possibility that by the end of the 21st century, the entire North Polar ice cap might disappear during the summer months, 100 years away. Now, the leading ice scientists are saying it could completely disappear in the next 5 to 7 years. It's been there uninterrupted for 1 million years, and for most of the last 3 million years. Almost half of it is already gone. And if we cross certain thresholds, we run the very severe risk that the problem itself will move beyond our capacity to resolve it successfully. We still have time to avoid the worst and most horrific consequences of this crisis, but we have to act. And so for you to come together, to join in an effort to put in place a transition plan to create a safe climate for us and for future generations is truly an act of leadership and political courage. But this goes far beyond politics. Now, in 2009, as we look into the future, we can see that we're standing in front of a fork in the road. We can take one of two different directions. We can go blindly forward on the pathway we've been following. If we continue on that path, it leads toward a catastrophic outcome. So what should we do? We should respond not only to the danger, but also to the opportunity. There's an old African proverb that says, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We're in the unusual situation where we have to go far quickly. I look at this fork in the road and I look at the other path and I see opportunity and hope. Our children, not too many years from now, will look back and depending upon what their lives are like, they will ask one of two questions to us. If the health of the ecological systems upon which we depend have been destroyed, and if the world is spinning toward the catastrophe foretold, they would be justified in asking of us, what were you thinking? Why didn't you listen to what the scientists were saying? Did you not notice? Did you not care? I want them to ask a second question. If they look around them and they see an economy in renewal and an ecological system that is beginning to heal, with people turning to a common purpose to make the climate safe, I want them to look back and ask, how did you find the moral courage to rise up and solve a crisis that so many pessimists said was impossible to solve? And part of the answer will be that in Melbourne, Australia, a movement gained force with men and women from every part of that great nation coming together to say, we do understand, we know things are different, we know we have a challenge, and we will respond. What you have before you with this launch is a very practical, very carefully considered transition plan toward a safe climate. I urge each and every one of you to respond positively to the opportunity that it represents, because we can solve this crisis. We have everything we need to do so. With the possible exception of political will, But in the United States and Australia, we know that political will is a renewable resource. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for being here.